The boy's hands were bleeding. That was the first thing Cale noticed. Not the wrinkled uniform. Not the split lip. Not even the way the child moved through the door like he was already apologizing for existing. The hands. Small. Clenched so tight the knuckles had split open across 2 fingers. Dried blood crusted at the edges like someone had tried to clean it and given up halfway through. Cale didn't move from behind the counter. He watched. That was what he did. He watched, he measured, and he decided, all before anyone in the room had any idea they were being studied. The diner was almost empty. 2 booths down. A man in a gray jacket nursed the same cup of coffee he'd ordered 40 minutes ago. Near the window, an older woman methodically cut her pie into pieces she never actually ate. Regular faces. Safe faces. People who understood that Cale's place had a specific kind of quiet, and that quiet was the price of admission. The boy didn't understand that yet. He stood just past the threshold. Small, still, eyes scanning the room the way someone scans for exits. Hi viewers, here's what I need to know right now. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone could see straight through you? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Those eyes landed on the food behind the counter. And they stayed there. Cale recognized that look. He'd seen it exactly twice before in his life. Once on a stray dog that had been cornered behind his building for 3 days, and once in a mirror a long time ago in a life he didn't talk about anymore. Hunger like that wasn't about food. It was about how long someone had gone without feeling safe enough to ask for any. Kitchens closing. His voice came out flat. Automatic. The words he used when he wanted someone gone without making it a confrontation. The boy didn't move. Cale set down the glass he'd been drying. You hear me? Nothing. Just those eyes, dark brown, too sharp, too old for the face they were sitting in. Still fixed on the food. Then, barely above the hum of the overhead light. Please. 1 word. Cale had heard that word in 100 different tones over the years. Desperate. Manipulative. Theatrical. Performative. He'd learned to hear the difference between someone using the word and someone meaning it. This child meant it. He exhaled through his nose. Slow. Controlled. Then he pulled a stool out from under the counter and set it by the nearest seat at the bar. Sit. The boy moved immediately. No hesitation. No thank you. Just compliance, the fast, practiced kind that comes from learning not to give someone time to change their mind. Cale noticed that too. He put a plate together without thinking too hard about it. Leftover rice, a portion of braised short rib that hadn't made it out of the warming tray, a biscuit from the batch that morning. Nothing fancy. Honest food. He slid it across the counter. The boy looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he ate. And that right there stopped Cale cold. Because the child didn't eat like a child. No mess. No excitement. No picking around anything unfamiliar. He ate like someone running a calculation, how much, how fast, what to save if it gets taken away. There was a rhythm to it that had nothing to do with manners and everything to do with survival. Like his body had automated the process because the mind couldn't afford to stay present during meals. That kind of behavior didn't come from one missed dinner. That came from a pattern. Cale leaned back against the shelf behind him, arms crossed, watching without making it obvious he was watching. You got a name? The boy slowed. Just barely. Malik. The pause before it was a half-second too long. Cale didn't push. He filed it away instead. The hesitation, the careful way the word landed like it had been chosen rather than remembered, and let the silence breathe. The woman near the window finally ate a piece of her pie. The man in gray refilled his own coffee from the pot Cale left on the table for regulars. And the boy ate every last bite. When the plate was empty, he sat very still, like he wasn't sure what the next move was supposed to be. Like the transaction had ended and he didn't know his part in the exit. Cale pulled the plate back without comment. Didn't ask where he came from. Didn't ask where he was going. Just turned back toward the sink. Behind him, he heard the stool shift. The boy was getting up. Doors lock at 11, Cale said without turning around. Don't be on the wrong side of them. A pause. Then the quiet sound of small feet moving toward the exit. Then nothing. Cale stood at the sink for a long moment after the door closed. He should have felt nothing. He ran through the logic. Hungry kid. Fed him. Done. Clean transaction with no further obligation. This city had 1,000 hungry kids and exactly one rule that had kept Cale breathing this long. You don't get involved in things that don't belong to you. Simple. Proven. Non-negotiable. He turned the water on and started washing the plate. But his eyes moved just once to the door. And what stopped him wasn't the logic. It was something underneath it. Something that had activated the moment the boy sat down and hadn't powered back off since. Because there had been a scent. Faint. Carefully masked, the kind of mask that required specific knowledge and specific product, not something a street kid would know or afford. But underneath the mask, something pressed down. Suppressed. Not hidden by neglect. Hidden on purpose. Cale set the plate in the rack and stared at the wall above the sink. He'd spent 15 years in a world where that kind of suppression meant one thing. Someone didn't want this child to be found. The question was whether that someone was protecting him. Or hunting him. He came back the next night. Same time. Same silence. Same seat. Cale didn't say anything. He just put a plate together and slid it across the counter, and the boy Malik, or whatever his name actually was, ate with that same controlled, mechanical focus that had nothing to do with enjoyment. Cale watched from the side of his eye. Tonight he could see more. The uniform was the same one from the night before, but someone had tried to press it. Badly. The collar was stiff on one side, crooked on the other, like hands that didn't quite know how to use an iron had given it their best shot. The shoes were clean. Too clean, actually, scrubbed white at the toe in a way that left faint watermarks on the leather. This was a child trying to look put together. And failing just enough that it hurt to look at. But it was the posture that Cale kept coming back to. Straight back. Shoulders pulled in slightly, not slumped, not braced, but contained. The kind of posture you developed when you spent a long time in spaces where taking up too much room had consequences. He didn't fidget. Didn't look around the diner the way a curious kid would. He watched the door. Not obviously. Not in a way that would read as anxious to a casual observer. But Cale was not a casual observer. And the boy's gaze moved to that entrance every 90 seconds like a clock had been set inside him. You go to school? The boy looked up. For the first time since he'd started coming here, he actually looked directly at Cale. Yes. Which one? Pause, shorter this time, but still there. Westbrook Prep. Cale kept his face neutral. Westbrook Prep was on the north side of the city, where the buildings had actual lobbies and the streets got cleaned twice a week. It wasn't in this neighborhood. It wasn't close to this neighborhood. And it charged the kind of tuition that came with a different zip code and a very specific kind of parent. He didn't say any of that. Long way from here, he said instead. The boy looked back at his plate. Yeah. He ate 2 more bites. Then, without looking up, the food here is good. It wasn't a compliment exactly. Came out more like an observation. A fact being logged. But something about it landed differently than Cale expected. He turned back to the grill and didn't answer. The 3rd night, Cale gave him a glass of water without being asked. The 4th night, he added a 2nd biscuit. The boy noticed both. Said nothing. But the pace of his eating shifted barely, almost imperceptibly. Just slightly less like evacuation and slightly more like something that resembled a meal. That was the night Cale noticed the sleeve. The uniform jacket had ridden up when the boy reached for the glass. And for less than 2 seconds, the inside of his left forearm was visible. A bruise. Not fresh. For maybe 5 days old, yellowing at the edges. Long and lateral, not from a fall. Falls made impact bruises. This shape came from pressure. Something wrapped or gripped. The sleeve came back down. The boy kept eating. Cale said nothing. But something behind his ribs went tight and quiet and very, very still. On the 5th night, a man Cale didn't recognize came into the diner and sat in the back booth. That alone wasn't unusual. Cale had unknowns come in regularly. The diner sat in a specific gray zone of the city, not affiliated, not protected, which paradoxically made it safer than most places. People who didn't want to be identified somewhere identifiable came here. But this man wasn't eating. He ordered coffee, positioned himself at an angle that gave him a clear line of sight to the counter, and didn't touch the cup. He was watching the boy, not overtly, not stupidly, but the gaze had direction, and the direction was wrong. Cale moved through the kitchen, came around the long way, and stopped behind the counter 2 feet closer to where the boy was sitting. Not a statement. Just a position. The man in the back booth looked at Cale for the first time. And then he looked away. Paid for coffee he didn't drink. Left. Cale stood at the counter and kept his breathing even. The boy set down his fork. "That man was looking at me," he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. Like he already knew. Cale looked at the side of the boy's face. 7, maybe 8 years old. Clean uniform. Bruise under the sleeve. Eyes that checked the door every 90 seconds. "You know him?" Cale asked. The boy picked up his fork again. "No." One word. But his grip on the fork was too tight. And when Cale glanced toward the window, the man was standing on the sidewalk across the street, still watching. The enforcers came in on a Wednesday. 3 of them. Cale knew the type before they cleared the doorway. The way they moved, spread just wide enough apart to occupy space without looking like they were trying to. The kind of men who'd been told their whole lives that their size was a language, and had learned to speak it fluently. They weren't from any of the top houses. Mid-level. Lower-tier pack with a reputation for working the edges of neighborhoods that higher families didn't bother policing. They found value in gaps, in things that weren't properly claimed. Cale watched them scan the room. He already knew what they'd find. The boy was at the counter. Same stool, same position, halfway through a plate of rice and chicken that he was working through with that quiet, methodical focus. He didn't look up when they walked in, but his shoulders moved, just slightly, a tightening across the back. The kind of physical response that the body starts making automatically when danger has been introduced into the body's memory often enough that it stops waiting for the mind to catch up. The 3 men slid into a booth. Ordered drinks they clearly didn't come for, and talked to each other in a register loud enough to carry. "Neutral ground's getting soft," one of them said. He was the widest of the 3. Neck like a door frame, voice like he'd swallowed gravel years ago and just left it in there. The other 2 didn't respond, but they laughed. Cale didn't look at them. He moved behind the counter with the same deliberate calm he always moved with. Filling a glass here, adjusting a towel there, and positioned himself so that he was directly behind where the boy was sitting. Not beside him. Behind. The distinction mattered. "Didn't know you were running a daycare now, Cale." The gravel-voiced one again, louder this time. The man at the window table pretended to read his phone. The woman in the corner booth stared hard at her napkin. The boy's fork went still, just for a second. Then he started eating again. Slowly, like he was working very hard to appear like he wasn't listening. Cale set both hands flat on the counter. One of the other enforcers, younger, with the particular kind of smirk that lives on the face of men who've never faced a consequence they didn't get warned about first, slid out of the booth. He walked toward the counter, casual, like he was heading for the coffee station. But his trajectory was off. He wasn't heading for the coffee station. His eyes were on the boy. Cale was already moving before the man's hand lifted. Not fast. Not dramatic. Controlled. He came around the end of the counter, stepped into the space between the enforcer and the boy, and stopped. Close enough that the man would have to make a specific choice about whether to continue, reach past Cale, or stop. The enforcer stopped. He looked up at Cale's face, and something in his expression shifted. Not fear, not yet, but a recalibration. The way a person's eyes move when they realize the math of a situation has changed and they haven't run the new numbers yet. "You reaching for something?" Cale asked. His voice was the same volume it always was. That was the part that worked. Not loudness. Not threat posturing. The absence of any change in register, like the situation hadn't triggered anything in him, like this was simply a conversation he was having while standing in a specific location. The enforcer looked at the boy, then back at Cale. Kids unclaimed, he said. The counters closed to walk-ups. Cale didn't move. Sit down or leave. A beat. The gravel-voiced one in the booth was watching now. Still seated. Still holding his drink. The younger enforcer's jaw tightened. He was doing the math. Cale let him do it. Because the answer was going to come out the same way every time. Cale's diner, Cale's city position, Cale's 15 years of neutral territory that had value precisely because everyone on every side of every line in the city knew he didn't take sides. Which meant if he was standing here between a man and a child, it meant something. It meant he'd already decided. The enforcer stepped back. One step. Then he turned, slow, and walked back to the booth. The three of them exchanged looks. Drinks were finished. A few coins dropped on the table. No one said anything as they left. The door swung shut. The regular at the window exhaled. The woman in the corner picked up her fork again. Cale stood still for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he turned back to the counter and resumed the position he'd been in before they entered. Same stance, same stillness, same expression. The boy was looking at him. Not eating. Just looking. Finish your food, Cale said. The boy looked down at his plate. He picked up his fork. Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. Then, they're going to come back. Not a question. Not a fear. A fact. Delivered in the same flat, certain tone that 7-year-olds aren't supposed to have access to. Cale picked up a glass and started drying it. Probably, he said. The boy processed that. And you'll do the same thing? Cale set the glass down. Eat your food. The boy ate his food. But as Cale turned toward the kitchen, he heard it low, almost too quiet to register through the ambient noise of the diner. Thank you. He didn't stop walking. Didn't acknowledge it. But something in his chest registered it. Stored it. And outside on the sidewalk, 40 feet from the diner window, the gravel-voiced enforcer was on a phone call, talking to someone. His eyes stayed on the diner door the entire time. The boy asked his first real question on the 9th night. Before that, it had been small things, functional exchanges. The food, the time, one-word answers that Cale never pushed past. But on the 9th night, after the plate was cleared and the diner had emptied out and the overhead lights had been dimmed to the half-setting Cale used when he was winding down without fully closing, the boy set both palms flat on the counter and looked at Cale with the directness that kept catching him off guard. Why don't you ask me anything? Cale was wiping down the far end of the counter. He didn't stop wiping. Because you'd lie, he said. The boy was quiet for a moment. Then maybe. Not maybe. Another pause. How do you know? Cale reached the end of the counter and folded the cloth over his arm. Because everyone who comes in here has a version of themselves they're showing me and a version they're keeping. You just show me less than most. The boy looked at the counter. Is that bad? Didn't say it was bad. A beat. You do it too, the boy said. Cale looked at him. The boy was still looking at the counter. But there was something in the set of his jaw. Careful, deliberate, that said this wasn't a random observation. This was something he'd been sitting on. You move through this whole place, the boy continued. And everyone thinks they know you. But nobody actually talks to you. And you don't talk to anyone either. You just... He paused, searching for the word. Watch. Cale set the cloth down on the shelf behind him. You been watching me watch. Yes. Why? The boy finally looked up. Because you're the only person in this city who fed me without wanting something back for it. That landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to land. Cale turned toward the coffee machine. Not because he needed coffee, but because he needed a direction to face that wasn't the boy's eyes. Doesn't mean anything, he said. I know. The boy's voice was steady. But it still happened. The silence stretched. Outside, a car passed. Its headlights swept across the window and moved on. Malik's not your real name, Cale said. No preamble. No softening. Just the sentence dropped clean. The boy didn't flinch. No. You going to tell me the real one? A long pause. The kind that has weight to it. Not because the person is thinking about the answer, but because they're deciding whether the room is safe enough for it. Not yet. Cale nodded once. All right, that was it. No pressure. No follow-up. He filled a glass with water, set it in front of the boy without being asked, and went back to closing tasks. The boy watched him for a few seconds, like he was waiting for a catch, some secondary angle that made the exchange make sense. It didn't come. He drank the water. Then quieter. What do you do? When people here get in trouble? I run a diner. Before that, Cale stacked the salt shakers into their overnight tray. Nothing worth talking about. But you know things. The boy said it with the certainty of someone who had already concluded this and was now just stating it out loud. About this city. The families. How things work. You know things too, Cale said. For someone your age. The boy went quiet. But not a deflection quiet. A caught in the truth quiet. Like Cale had just confirmed something the boy wasn't sure anyone would notice. My father taught me, he said finally. Cale stopped moving. Just for a second. Then he kept stacking. He teach you to suppress your scent too? The boy went absolutely still. The kind of still that isn't calm. It's the absence of every movement while the mind runs at full speed behind a face that's been trained to show nothing. 5 seconds. Then, you can tell? Under it. Cale didn't look up. It's faint. But it's there. The boy's hands came off the counter. He drew them into his lap. And for the first time in 9 nights, he looked something that wasn't just careful. He looked young. Actually, genuinely, vulnerably young. The way kids are supposed to look, the way this one almost never did. Cale glanced at him. Then away. It's a good mask, he said. Whoever showed you how to do it knew what they were doing. A long quiet. Then barely. He wanted to make sure I could disappear if I had to. Cale turned off the overhead half-lights. The diner settled into the amber glow of the low fixtures. Did it work? He asked. The boy stared at the counter. I don't know yet. Outside, 3 blocks east, a black SUV with no plates turned off its engine and parked. It didn't move again. The black SUV was there the next morning. Same spot, same angle. Cale noticed it when he unlocked the front door at 6:45. He registered it the way he registered all out-of-place things. Without reacting, without letting the reaction show. Filing it behind his eyes where it would stay until he needed it. He made coffee, unlocked the kitchen, pulled the chairs down from the tables. The SUV didn't move. By 8 o'clock, Cale had identified 2 other things that didn't belong. A man at the bus stop across the street who had been standing in the same position for 40 minutes and hadn't gotten on a single bus. And a food delivery van parked at the mouth of the alley beside the building. Idling, no delivery made, facing outward instead of in the direction deliveries came from. He poured coffee for his morning regulars and kept his expression level. That afternoon, the boy came in an hour earlier than usual. He was breathing wrong. Not visibly wrong, not panting, not gasping. But Cale caught it immediately. Slightly elevated. Controlled deliberately. The kind of breathing that comes after someone has been walking fast without wanting to look like they're walking fast. The boy sat down. Didn't reach for the menu he never used anyway. Just sat. Cale slid a glass of water across the counter. The boy drank half of it in one pull. Then he set it down and looked straight ahead at the shelf of condiments behind the counter like he was reading something written there. Cale waited. 3 minutes. 3 different people followed me, the boy said. From school. All the way here? One of them stopped a block away. The other 2? I don't know. His jaw was tight. I lost them in the East Side Market, but I don't know if I actually lost them or if they just let me think I did. Cale looked at the side of his face. That distinction, I lost them versus they let me think I did, was not an 8-year-old's distinction. That was tradecraft. The kind of thinking that got installed through training, or through experience, or through surviving something that made the lesson permanent. You do this before? Cale asked. Run. Think like that while you're running. The boy was quiet. My father made me practice. A beat. In case. In case what? No answer. Cale turned toward the grill and started the prep for the dinner rush. Behind him, he heard the boy set the glass down. "There's a man outside," the boy said. "He's been there since I sat down. He's not going to come in. He's just going to watch." Cale glanced at the window. The man from the bus stop. Different coat now, but the same build, same stillness. "He works for someone," Cale said. "I know. Someone looking for you." The boy didn't answer, but his hand, resting on the counter beside the water glass, curled slowly inward. Just the fingers, a small, controlled fold like a thing closing to protect itself. Cale set down the prep knife. He didn't make a big motion out of it. Just set it on the cutting board and turned around and leaned against the back counter with his arms crossed, looking at the boy. "Is it someone you want to be found by?" A long pause. Something moved across the boy's face. Fast, there and gone, the kind of expression that gets buried before it can be read. But Cale caught the edge of it. Not relief, not hope, fear, real fear. The particular kind that doesn't shout because fear that shouts is still hoping to be heard. This was the quiet kind. The kind that had already accepted that being heard might not change anything. "If someone finds me," the boy said slowly, "will you give me back?" The diner was very quiet. The refrigerator unit hummed. Car passed outside. Cale looked at the boy for a long moment. Then, "No." One word. Not a promise. Not a declaration. Not wrapped in anything that would make it soft or manageable or easy to take back. Just no. Flat. Certain. Immediate. The boy looked at Cale for the first time that afternoon. Really looked. Like he was trying to find the catch. Like no had never been the answer before, and his whole system was running a check to see if it could be trusted this time. Cale held his gaze and didn't offer anything else. Then he turned back to the grill. "Food'll be ready in 10 minutes. The boy turned back to the counter. He didn't say anything else. But the hand on the counter, the one that had folded inward, slowly opened back up. Flat. Relaxed. Or at least, as close to relaxed as hands that had learned not to trust open spaces could manage. Cale cooked. The man outside never came in. But by the time the boy finished eating and quietly got up to leave, Cale had counted a total of 4 different positions outside the diner that had been rotated through over the course of the evening. 4. Not one person watching. A team. And none of them from any house Cale recognized. Which meant whoever they worked for wasn't someone who operated in the open. The boy paused at the door. He looked back at Cale. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Cale was already rinsing the plate. "Doors open at 6, he said. The boy nodded once. Then he stepped outside. And Cale watched through the window as the man from the bus stop straightened up and turned to track him. Then his phone moved. A call going out. Cale stood very still behind his counter. Whoever was on the other end of that call, whatever they were being told right now, whatever decision was about to be made about that boy, it was above every pay grade in this neighborhood. And Cale had just told a child he wouldn't hand him over. To someone he didn't even know yet. He dried his hands on the cloth behind the counter. Outside, another black SUV, different from the morning one, turned slowly onto the street. And stopped. The boy didn't come. 6 o'clock passed. 7. Cale wiped down the same section of counter 3 times without noticing he was doing it. 8 o'clock. The dinner crowd moved through. Regulars. A few faces he didn't recognize. The usual low hum of a Wednesday night. He took orders. Plated food. Made change. Said the things people expected him to say when they came to a place they trusted. But his eyes went to the door. Every time it opened. Every single time. It was never the boy. By 9:30, the diner had mostly cleared out. Cale stood at the far end of the counter and looked at the stool. Empty. He told himself it didn't mean anything. Kids got sick. Kids had other things happen. One missed night wasn't a pattern, and a pattern was the only thing that meant something in this city. One data point was noise. He told himself that. Then he untied his apron at 10:15, 45 minutes before closing, and told his cook, Darnell, to lock up. Darnell looked at him, didn't say a word. because Darnell had worked here for 9 years and had never once seen Cale leave before close. Cale was already out the door. He didn't have an address. He had a direction. Westbrook Prep was north, which meant the route the boy would have taken to get here curved through the East Side Market District and then south along Meridian. He'd said as much indirectly over the past week. Small details that Cale had never asked for but had cataloged anyway. He walked. The East Side Market was closed at this hour, stalls dark, the smell of cardamom and exhaust still hanging in the air. He moved through the alley cuts, checking angles, looking for things out of place. He found it half a block past the market's south exit. A single child's sneaker, white, scrubbed at the toe, sitting on its side against a drain pipe like it had been kicked there or dropped in a hurry. Cale crouched, picked it up, turned it over. Size 6. The insole had a name written in marker, the way parents write names in children's shoes so they don't get mixed up in locker rooms or coat closets. The name wasn't Malik. Cale stared at it for a long moment. Then he stood up, put the shoe in his jacket pocket and kept moving. He found him 4 blocks east, a narrow space between a laundromat and a shuttered print shop, barely wide enough to walk through sideways. The boy was wedged into the far corner, knees pulled to his chest, back against the brick wall. Not hiding anymore, just sitting, still, the way people sit when the running is done and they're waiting to find out what comes next. He was shivering. Not from cold, the night wasn't cold enough for that, but the kind of shivering that starts in the chest, from the inside, from a body that has been running on adrenaline for too long and has finally run out of it. Cale stepped into the alley. The boy's eyes opened immediately, fast, alert. Whatever exhaustion had taken over his body had not reached his instincts. He saw Cale. Something in him, the shoulders, the jaw, went 1 degree less tight. Just 1. But it was there. Cale crouched down to the boy's level. He didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask if he was okay. He held out the shoe. The boy looked at it. Then at Cale. Then he took it. Cale stood. "Can you walk?" The boy pulled the shoe on without untying it, then pressed himself up the wall. He swayed once, caught himself. "Yes," he said. They walked back to the diner without speaking. Cale relocked the front door behind them, turned on the kitchen light, and sat the boy on the counter stool. He put together a plate. Fast, quiet, whatever was still warm, and set it in front of him. The boy didn't eat immediately this time. He sat with both hands wrapped around the glass of water Cale placed next to the plate and just breathed. Like someone relearning how. Cale leaned against the far counter and waited. Finally, they got closer tonight. The boy's voice was steady. Almost. They weren't just watching. They were moving. "Did they touch you?" "No." A pause. "I ran first." "Smart." The boy looked at the plate. "I dropped my shoe." "I noticed." A beat of quiet. Then the boy picked up his fork. And just before he started eating, so low Cale almost didn't catch it. "They found me." Past tense. Not they're looking. Found. Cale went very still. He said nothing, but his hand, resting flat on the counter behind him, pressed down slowly until the knuckles went white, because found meant something specific. It meant someone somewhere had already confirmed the location, which meant tonight wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 3 nights of quiet. That was what made it worse. After the alley. After the boy had eaten and Cale had set up a cot in the back storage room without asking permission and without offering explanation. 3 nights passed where nothing moved. No SUVs. No watchers at the bus stop. No unfamiliar faces holding drinks they didn't touch. Just stillness. Cale didn't trust it for a second, because he'd lived in the city long enough to know exactly what that kind of stillness meant. It wasn't safety. It wasn't retreat. It was the pause before something that didn't need to sneak. He kept the boy close. The boy kept going to school. Cale didn't stop him because stopping him would have raised a different kind of attention, but he changed the route each morning, gave him 3 different alley paths, and told him to be back before 5 regardless. The boy followed the instructions without question. No pushback. No why. Just compliance the way he'd been complying since the first night. Fast, practiced, total. On the fourth day of quiet, Darnell came into the kitchen during the afternoon lull and stood in the doorway without speaking. Cale looked at him. "People are talking," Darnell said. "People always talk. Different talk." Darnell's voice was careful. He was a big man. Wide shoulders, slow movements, the kind of careful that came from paying attention for a long time. Words getting around that you claimed something. "I haven't claimed anything. You stood between those enforcers and the boy. I was enforcing my own house rule." Darnell looked at him with the flat, knowing expression of someone who had heard Cale justify himself before and knew exactly what it sounded like. "Cale, what?" 3 separate houses sent people to look at this diner in the last 4 days. Cale stopped what he was doing, turned around. "Which 3? Darnell named them. 2 were mid-level. The third was not. The third was a name that changed the temperature of conversations when it entered them. Cale stood in his kitchen and did the math. Then he wiped his hands on his apron and walked to the back of the diner. The boy was at the small table in the storage room. Homework spread out, pencil moving, the very picture of a child doing ordinary things in an ordinary place. He looked up when Cale appeared in the doorway. "Have you told me everything?" Cale asked. The boy put the pencil down. "No," he said. "Honest. Just like that, no hesitation, no deflection. Just the clean, straight truth delivered without apology." Cale leaned against the door frame. "Are you going to?" The boy was quiet for a moment. Then, "There are things I'm not allowed to say." "Not allowed by who?" "My father." "Your father?" "Yes. The one who taught you to suppress your scent and run counter-surveillance routes at age 8. The boy held his gaze. "He had reasons. I'm sure he did. He was protecting me." "From what?" A long pause. The longest the boy had ever taken before an answer. Then he picked up his pencil. "Everyone," he said quietly, and went back to his homework. Cale stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he went back to the kitchen. At 8:47 that evening, 43 minutes before Cale would have closed, the diner went quiet. Not the regular quiet. Not the wind-down quiet of a place emptying out. This was a different kind. The active kind. The kind where the noise doesn't stop. It gets pushed out. Cale was behind the counter when it happened. He registered it the same way he registered all of it, without reaction, without any visible change in what his hands were doing. But his eyes moved. The man in the corner booth stopped talking mid-sentence and looked toward the door. The woman by the window picked up her bag from the floor and set it in her lap. Darnell came out of the kitchen, took one look at the room, and went back in. The door opened, and the silence came in with him. The man who walked through that door was tall. Not in the way the enforcers were tall, not bulk and presence bought through size. This was a different thing entirely. The kind of height that comes with a stillness so complete it makes the space around it feel borrowed. He wore a black suit. No tie. The first 2 buttons of his shirt undone in a way that was completely deliberate. Not casual, not careless, but chosen. Like a man who understood that every detail of his appearance said something, and had decided exactly what each thing would say. Behind him, 3 men. None of them looked at anything. Not the booths, not the counter, not the other customers. They looked at the exits. Just the exits. All of them. At the same time. The tall man didn't scan the room. He walked straight to the counter, pulled out the stool next to where the boy usually sat, and sat down. He looked at Cale. And waited. Cale set down the glass he'd been drying. "We're open," he said. "What can I get you?" The man looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were dark. Still. The kind of still that wasn't empty, it was full. Full of information being processed at a speed that didn't show on the surface. "Where is he?" the man said. Not a question. Never a question. Cale held his gaze. "Where is who?" The man tilted his head, just slightly, and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who already knew the answer and was curious to see how long the other person would take to stop pretending. From the back of the diner. A door. Footsteps. Small ones. The boy appeared in the hallway threshold, backpack in one hand, heading for the bathroom the way he did every evening around this time. He stopped. He saw the man, and every bit of color left his face. Nobody moved. For 3 full seconds, nobody in that diner moved. Then the boy's backpack slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor, and the sound of it, small, soft, completely ordinary, broke the freeze. The man at the counter turned on the stool. Slowly. Like he had all the time in the world. Like time was a thing that answered to him. He looked at the boy. Something crossed his face. Fast, controlled, there and gone before it could be named. Not warmth. Not relief. Something older than both. The expression of a person who has been carrying a weight for so long that setting it down doesn't feel like freedom. Feels like fear of what happens next. Come here, the man said. His voice was low. It didn't need volume. In this city, at this level, volume was for people who weren't sure they'd be obeyed. The boy didn't move. He stood at the edge of the hallway with both hands at his sides, chin slightly up, the way Cale had learned to read as the boy's version of holding his ground. He wasn't running. He wasn't going forward either. He was waiting. Cale watched all of it from behind the counter. He was watching the man more than the boy, because the man's eyes had moved. Just once, just briefly, to Cale. And what was in that look wasn't anger. It was assessment. Fast, clean, thorough. The kind you do when you walk into a room and need to understand every variable before committing to a move. You kept him fed, the man said, still looking at Cale. Still not a question. He was hungry, Cale said. He was placed. He was sitting on a stool in my diner asking for food. The man's eyes held his for a beat. Then he looked back at the boy. Zion, he said. The name landed in the room like something real. Heavy. Specific. Not Malik. Zion. The boy, Zion, looked at the man. Father, he said. And there it was. The piece that reordered everything. Cale did not visibly react. He stood behind his counter with his hands flat on the surface and let the recalculation run quietly, behind his face, where it belonged. Because the man sitting on that stool, the man who had walked in with 3 people who watched exits instead of rooms, was not a mid-level enforcer, not a house boss, not even someone in the upper structure of the city's visible hierarchy. Cale had recognized him the moment he walked in. He'd just been hoping he was wrong. He wasn't wrong. Reyes Calderon. The name alone closed businesses, ended careers, redirected traffic on entire blocks without a single word being spoken publicly. He didn't run a house. He was above houses. He was the structure that houses existed inside of. And his son had been eating rice and biscuits at Cale's counter for 11 nights. Cale kept his expression even. Sit down, Zion, Reyes said. The boy crossed the room, slowly, and sat on his usual stool, 2 seats from his father, with the careful, deliberate posture of someone sitting in a space they know well, next to someone they're not sure about yet. Reyes looked at that, at the stool, at how easily the boy moved to it. Something changed in his face. Very slight. You protected him, Reyes said. Cale didn't answer. 3 houses sent eyes to this diner, Reyes continued. All 3 reported the same thing. You positioned yourself between my son and an enforcer crew. You didn't broker. You didn't negotiate. You stood. I enforce my own rules here. Your rules included letting an 8-year-old sleep in your storage room. Cale said nothing. Reyes leaned forward slightly, both forearms on the counter, which was the first time he'd adjusted his posture since sitting down. It wasn't casual. Nothing this man did was casual. It was a signal, a lowering of one specific kind of guard. You know who I am, Reyes said. Yes. And you're still standing there. It's my counter. For the first time, a real pause. Reyes studied him, the way a person studies something they weren't expecting to find. Then, power doesn't always announce itself, Reyes said quietly. Sometimes it just holds a position and waits to see who moves first. He looked at his son. Zion was watching Cale, the way he always watched Cale, measuring, cataloging, filing. He does that, Kale said. He learned it from me, Reyes said. A beat. You have good eyes, Reyes added. Most people would have missed the scent suppression entirely. Most people weren't looking. No, Reyes straightened. They weren't. He was quiet for a moment. The three men near the door had not moved. The remaining customers, too, now the bravest of the regulars, were absolutely still. There are people in this city, Reyes said slowly, who want my son dead, not threatened, not leveraged, dead, because of what he represents and what he will become. He said it the way people state weather. Just fact. Just condition. I placed him here, Reyes continued. This neighborhood. This route. This diner. A pause. I needed to know who would see him, who would move, and what they'd do when they moved. Kale felt something shift. Not in the room. In his understanding of it. You set this up, Kale said. I created conditions, Reyes said. You made choices. You used your son as bait. Reyes' eyes didn't flinch. I used my son to find someone I could trust. A beat. There's a difference. Kale stared at him. Is there? He said. The room was very quiet. Zion was looking at his father now, with an expression that was too complicated for one name. Love. Anger. Understanding. All three sitting on that small face at the same time. Reyes looked at his son. Something passed between them. Fast, private, the language of two people who have been surviving the same life from different positions. Then Reyes stood. The people watching this diner, he said, are not all mine. He straightened his jacket. One precise movement. By morning, every house in this city will know that Zion Calderon was seen here, that someone stood for him, that a claim, even an informal one, was made. He looked at Kale. That changes your position. Kale held his gaze. My position was already set. It was set in a smaller world, Reyes said. That world just got larger. He moved toward the door. His men adjusted, not blocking, not escorting, just reorienting around him the way objects in orbit move. At the door, he stopped. Didn't turn around. The boy will come back tomorrow, Reyes said. And the night after. A pause. So will I. The door opened. The three men went first. Then Reyes. And then the door closed. And the silence he left behind was a different kind than the silence he'd brought in. This one had weight. Because outside, right now, in cars and back rooms and upper floor offices across the city, conversations were happening. About a diner. About a boy. About a man behind a counter who had stood in the wrong place at the wrong time and, by doing so, had become part of something that didn't have edges he could yet see. Kale looked at Zion. Zion was still on the stool, looking at the door. Did you know? Kale asked. A pause. Some of it, the boy said. Which part? Zion picked up the water glass, drank, set it down. The part where he was watching, the boy said. Not the part where you'd say no. Kale looked at the side of his face. To giving you back. Yes. A beat. Nobody's ever said no before. Kale stood there for a moment longer. Then he picked up the cloth behind the counter and went back to work. By morning, the city had already decided what it thought. Kale didn't need anyone to tell him. He could see it in the way the first customer of the day, a man named Terrell who came in every Thursday for eggs and never said more than 12 words, sat down, looked at Kale and said nothing but held the look 2 seconds longer than usual. 2 seconds. In this city. That was a statement. By 9 o'clock, Darnell had fielded 4 separate phone calls on the kitchen line that he ended without explanation and reported to Kale with a face that said everything his words didn't. By 11, a woman Kale had never seen before walked in, ordered tea, left it untouched, and placed a folded piece of paper on the table when she left. Kale opened it. 2 words. Be careful. No signature. He folded it back up and put it in his apron pocket and kept moving. By afternoon, he understood the shape of what was happening. The 3 houses that had been watching, they'd made their calls. Word had moved the way word moves in closed systems, fast and specific and with a direction. The city's power structure had received a piece of information and was now processing it. Cale Varelli. Neutral ground. The boy. A claim. Not a legal claim. Not a formal one. Nothing that had been declared in any room or before any authority. But in this world, authority wasn't the thing that made claims real. Witnesses were. And there had been witnesses. At 2:15, Ray's man. Not Ray's himself, but the quieter of the three from the night before. A tall man with close-cropped hair and a calm that matched Cale's own. Came in and sat at the far end of the counter. He didn't order anything. There are two factions currently in discussion, the man said, quietly. About the boy. Cale kept wiping the counter. What kind of discussion? The kind that ends with a decision about whether to move before the Calderon position solidifies. And the claim changes that calculus. It complicates it. The man looked at his hands. If the boy is claimed, even informally, even by someone outside the structure, moving on him becomes an act of aggression against two parties instead of one. They'd have to go through me to get to him. Yes. I'm not in any house. That's what makes it complicated. The man finally looked up. You're not a target anyone wants to make. Neutral ground has kept a lot of blood off a lot of floors for a long time. Moving against you would collapse something that benefits everyone. Cale stopped wiping. But, he said. The man nodded. But. The word sat there by itself. Because there was always a but. The factions moving on Zion aren't local, the man said. They don't care about your neutral territory. They don't care about the history of this diner or what it represents to the houses here. They're from outside. Far outside. How far? The man was quiet for a moment. They're the reason Zion's scent has been suppressed since he was 3 years old, he said. Cale stood very still. 3 years old. He did the math on that and did not like what it produced. Ray's has been hiding him, Cale said. Ray's has been protecting him, the man corrected, gently but firmly. Zion is the only heir, the only one who carries the Calderon line forward. There are people, organized, patient, well-funded people, who have been working toward a single objective for 5 years. Ending the line. Yes, the man stood. The placement in this neighborhood was not random, he said. Ray's mapped 7 possible locations. He chose this one because of you specifically. Cale looked at him. Your history, the man continued. Your particular set of skills from before this diner existed. Your reputation for not being bought. And, a pause, your instincts. He gambled on my instincts. He verified them, the man said. There's a difference. He moved toward the door. Tonight, he said without turning, the two factions will meet to make their decision. Ray's will be making his own. And me, the man stopped. You're already in it, he said simply. The question now isn't whether. It's how deep. He left. Cale stood behind his counter in the afternoon quiet of his own diner and let that land where it needed to land. He looked at the stool. Zion's stool. Empty right now. But in a few hours, 5:15, the boy was consistent. There would be a small figure with a wrinkled uniform and sharp eyes and a real name that wasn't the one he'd offered first, and he'd sit down and he'd eat, and he'd watch the door every 90 seconds, and he'd ask a question that had too much weight for the face asking it. And Cale would answer, because he'd already said no. Once. And in this city, once was enough. He untied his apron, folded it on the counter, and walked to the back room. He opened a specific cabinet. The one behind the supply shelf, the one he hadn't opened in 6 years, and looked at what was inside for a long time. Then he closed it again without taking anything out. Not yet. But he noted that the lock still worked. That mattered. Because tonight was going to be different. He could already feel it. Not in anything visible, not in anything he could point to, but in that deep, quiet place in his chest that had been sending signals since he was young enough to trust them, and had never once been wrong. Something was coming, and it wasn't knocking. The boy walked in at 5:12. 3 minutes early. That alone told Cale everything. Zion sat down, put both hands flat on the counter, and looked at Cale with those eyes, dark, specific, already running 10 steps ahead. They're going to move tonight, the boy said. I know. My father. I know. Zion looked at him for a moment. You talked to Damon, his father's man. This afternoon. The boy nodded slowly. He looked at the counter, processing. Then, are you scared? Cale pulled a plate together without answering immediately. Set it in front of Zion. Eat first, he said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving. Zion looked at the food. He picked up his fork. But he didn't eat. He just held it, looking at the plate, and Cale could see the actual weight of what this child was carrying. Not just tonight, not just the situation, but all of it. Years of suppressed scent. Years of practiced routes. Years of knowing you were a target before you were old enough to understand what that word fully meant. Years of never getting to just be a kid who sat in a diner and ate food without watching the door. You didn't ask for this? Zion said quietly. No, I didn't either. I know. A beat. I'm sorry, the boy said. And the way he said it, not the reflex sorry, not the politeness sorry, but the real one, the one that comes from someone who has thought about the cost their existence places on the people around them and has been carrying that thought for a long time. Cale stopped moving. He put both hands flat on the counter. Don't, he said. Zion looked up. Don't apologize for existing, Cale said. Not in this diner. Not to me. Not ever. The boy held his gaze. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories when the moment is supposed to be obvious. Just a fraction. A loosening. Like a bolt that's been over-tightened for so long that even one quarter turn feels like release. He ate. Real eating this time. Not the survival calculation. Not the timed, mechanical process. Just a boy eating food in a place that felt, in this one specific moment, close enough to safe. At 6:47, the first car appeared on the street. Then a second. Then a third. They didn't park. They stopped. All three staggered across the block in a formation that wasn't coincidence. Cale watched them through the window. Darnell came out of the kitchen. He looked at the cars. Then at Cale. Get in the back, Cale said. Darnell didn't argue. Zion had turned on the stool and was watching the street too. Calm. Too calm for 8 years old. The calm of someone who has been trained for this and has always known, in some part of him, that this moment would eventually arrive. They're from outside, the boy said. Yes. They won't care about neutral ground. No. Then why aren't you moving? Zion asked. Cale looked at him. Because I don't move first. A beat. And because, he added. Your father's already here. Zion turned back to the window. He hadn't seen it. But Cale had. The fourth car, arriving from the opposite direction. No headlights. Positioned directly across from the diner entrance. And the specific stillness coming from it that Cale had clocked the night before. Ray's didn't arrive like the others. He arrived like a counter. A response that had been prepared before the question was asked. The diner door opened, and Ray's walked in. No suit this time. Dark clothes. Practical. The kind of thing a person wears when they're not performing. Behind him, not 3 men, 7. They spread without instruction, taking positions, covering angles, and the whole thing happened in under 4 seconds with a coordination that didn't need words because they'd done this before. Many times before. Ray's walked to the counter. He looked at his son. Zion looked back. The same complicated expression as the night before. Love and anger and understanding all occupying the same face at the same time. You're safe, Ray said. I know, Zion said. A pause. You were always safe, Ray said. And for the first time, just the first time, something in his voice came apart at the edge. Just slightly. Just enough. I need you to know that. Zion looked at his father for a long moment. Then he looked at Cale. He kept me safe, the boy said. Ray's turned to Cale. And something happened on that man's face that Cale suspected very few people had ever seen. Gratitude. Real gratitude. Not the political kind. Not the transactional kind. The kind that comes from a person who has been afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. and has just found out that the thing they were afraid of losing is still here. Name your terms, Reyes said. I don't have terms. Everyone has terms. I run a diner, Cale said. That's my term. This stays what it is. Reyes looked at him. That's not possible anymore. Then make it possible. A long pause. Outside, the cars on the street hadn't moved, but neither had the ones Reyes had brought. And the city, this specific block, this specific intersection, was holding its breath. You understand what you're walking into, Reyes said. I understand what I already walked into, Cale said. 11 days ago. Reyes was quiet. Then, quietly, with the full weight of someone who chooses words the way other people choose weapons. Then you're part of this now. Not a threat. Not a promise. A statement of fact. A new condition. A line that had already been crossed. Cale looked at the boy on the stool. Zion was watching him. Waiting. The same way he'd waited that first night. Small hands flat. Eyes too sharp for the face they lived in. Sitting completely still in a world that had never once offered him stillness back. Cale looked at Reyes. The diner stays neutral, he said. Agreed. No weapons inside. Agreed. And the boy eats here when he wants to. Something shifted on Reyes' face. Agreed, he said. A beat. Outside, one of the street cars made a sound. An engine turning over. A door. A shift in weight. Then two of Reyes' men moved. Not fast. Not toward the door. Just repositioned. And outside, the engine sound stopped. Cale didn't look toward the window. He turned to the kitchen. Darnell, he called out. A pause. Yeah. Coffee's going to need to be made again. A beat. Then the sound of the coffee machine starting. Reyes sat down. On the stool next to his son. Neither of them spoke. But Zion, after a moment, went back to his plate. And finished eating. The food Cale had put in front of him 40 minutes ago. Quietly. Without checking the door. Not even once. And that right there was the thing Cale would remember. Not the cars outside. Not the power in the room. Not the name Reyes Calderon or what it meant or what the next days and weeks were going to look like. Just a boy. Eating food. Without watching for the door. Because for the first time in a very long time, he didn't have to. The city outside was already making its calculations. Already deciding, in the way cities like this decide things, through silence, through movement, through the slow repositioning of pieces on a board that most people never even knew they were standing on. And Cale stood at his counter, in his diner, in the same place he'd stood for 15 years. Except nothing about this position was the same anymore. And somewhere in one of those cars, the ones that hadn't moved, the ones that had pulled back but not left, a phone was ringing. Someone was being told what had happened tonight, what had been decided, what had formed in this small diner, on this ordinary street, over 11 nights and a plate of leftover short rib and one word. No. And the person on the other end of that call was going to have to decide what to do with that. The city was watching, still watching, the way cities always watch. Waiting to see if what formed tonight was strong enough to hold. Or if it would be tested. Not if, when. And the answer to that, the real answer, was still being written. One night at a time. That's where this story closes. But the world Cale just stepped into doesn't. If the story moved you, if you felt every pause, every plate of food, every moment that 8-year-old Zion sat at that counter and didn't check the door, share it with someone who needs to hear a story about what it looks like when one person decides to stand. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in this story stayed with you the most? Was it Cale's one word, no? Or was it the moment Zion finally ate without watching the door? Your voice in the comments inspires the next person who reads it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this one. Stories built on loyalty, survival, and the choices that define who we really are, those are what this channel is built for. Don't miss what comes next.